word that comes to their mind is the word aid. And aid is generally associated with a response to an event that has suddenly occurred. No one thinks of it in the perspective that this is something that has to continue for a long term for some people. But here, during this session, we'll get to hear different perspectives from people from different parts of the ecosystem. So we welcome all of you, and we're very happy that you're here to attend this session. So I'd like to introduce our moderator for the day, Dr. Tash. She's a researcher who specializes in energy access, climate finance, and international development. Working on different projects, she has a lot of experience in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. So welcome, Tash. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you very much for coming along to our session today. My name is Tash, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. And I'm really here today because of a research project that I'm involved in, which is looking at humanitarian energy failures. It's funded by Innovation Norway, and it's in partnership with the Global Platform for Action and UNITAR. And I thought maybe I would just take a second to explain where this project came from. A few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, when I was doing my PhD, I was involved in a project on energy access failures, which was inspired by a group of us who were kind of fed up of... Yeah, would this be better? As I was saying, a group of us came together. We had become kind of frustrated with being involved in and seeing these projects where energy access installations were made, but for some reason it went wrong and it failed. But then instead of there being an honest dialogue about what happened, it would just sort of disappear into the ether and never be spoken about ever again. So we wrote a paper, we got a little bit of money, and we wrote a paper about failure in energy access, which we presented at a conference, the Clean Cooking Forum in Accra, in, I think, 2022. And our presentation went down really well. People were really excited. There was a lot of appetite to start talking about failure. So we set up a little group of practitioners and donors and researchers who wanted to try and take this a bit further. And we met maybe every 2 months for about a year or so, and then it kind of fizzled out. So rather ironically, our dialogue about failure failed. And it ultimately failed because despite our best efforts, we couldn't really find anyone to support us to take it further. And there was only so far it could go, whilst everybody involved was doing it in their spare time. And it was through that I met Amy. And Amy and I both kind of always kept this in the back of our minds. And Amy works for the GPA and has been quietly in the background pitching this over the past 2 or 3 years. And she's finally managed to get Innovation Norway to fund this project, where what we want to do is examine humanitarian energy failures, understand why they happen, and try and create some kind of template or knowledge management system for capturing the stuff that goes well and goes not so well, so that at least we can learn from it and not keep on, trying to do the same clean cooking project over and over again in the same place, even though it's failed 3 times before. Okay, so let's see if this works. Okay, so why is humanitarian energy so important? Well, the number of displaced people is growing. It's currently estimated at around 120 million. That was in 2023. And more importantly, this growth rate is accelerating as the world becomes more fragile and as the impacts of climate change are, intensifying and displacing people further. Access to electricity and clean cooking fuel is absolutely critical to meet the essential needs of displaced populations in a healthy way, but it's lacking. According to modelling done by the GPA, 80% of displaced people are still relying on solid fuels for cooking, and over 90% have no electricity access at all. And with very limited resources available to provide energy to these populations, it's really important that the sector can openly discuss and learn from both the successes and the failures to make sure that future projects have the best possible chance of succeeding. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Therese from Innovation Norway, who's going to just tell you a bit more about this project. Unfortunately, she can't be here today, but we've pre-recorded her making some opening remarks.
On humanitarian energy lessons learned. My name is Therese. I'm the head of the Humanitarian Innovation Program at Innovation Norway. The Humanitarian Innovation Program is set up to support and de-risk humanitarian private innovation partnerships. This is because we see that collaboration between experts from different sectors is so important to develop solutions that can help us solve some of the key societal problems we're faced with today. However, to enter into such collaborations can be characterized with certain levels of risk. and therefore there is a need for de-risking mechanisms to encourage people to collaborate across sectors, and we are such a de-risking mechanisms. We're set up to take risk and to invest in projects that, if they're successful, will have a significant impact for people affected by crisis. However, not all the projects we invest in reach their intended outcome, and that's okay. This is an inherent part of working on innovation. However, it's only okay if we learn from it and build our next efforts on these lessons learned. That's why we've invested in this project on humanitarian energy lessons learned. We have in the past invested in a number of humanitarian energy projects. They have innovated around various components of what it will take to ensure sustainable energy access to people affected by crisis. It can be new technology, new funding mechanisms, new market-based principles, new partnerships, repair services, and sound waste management for e-waste. Some projects have been successful and some have not. What we would like to do now is to ensure that we capture all the lessons learned so that we can build on them, to be able to make informed decisions around future investments and innovation towards sustainable access to energy for people affected by crisis. I wish you a great seminar. Please engage actively, share from your experience, and ask the difficult questions. I look forward to hearing about the outcomes of your discussion.
So the plan for today is as follows. Firstly, I'm going to show you a video, which is a case study of the humanitarian energy failure, an improved cook stove and briquette project in Kakuma, Kenya. And then I'm going to invite our panelists to the stage, and we're going to have a quick discussion focused around 2 different questions. And then we're going to open it to the floor for a Q&A.
My name is Vincent Belin. I'm based in Turkana County, the northern part of Kenya, in one of the largest refugee camps in the country. I have been part of a project of clean cooking project and clean lighting implemented by SNV and Sidelining, targeting especially the displaced population in Kakuma. And the project started in 2017, where I worked up to 2021 before leaving and starting my own company called pment. The main goal of the project was to provide clean cooking technology, especially improved cook stove and also clean fuel. And it was briquettes made from human waste. So it met with the cultural background of the population living in Turkana County who refused to cook food from a charcoal made from their waste. And this was a big barrier for them to access the technology. But also, their level of income was not in a position of helping them to purchase the stove promoted by the project. And then the other reason was also the fact that those cook stoves and the technology promoting the briquette was coming from outside. So it made the resistance from the local population for them to adopt the technology easily. And this is the reason why the clean cooking project and the briquettes made from human waste didn't succeed. So the project was targeting 25,000 cook stoves produced and sold annually with the aim of giving access to over 20,000 households to use clean cooking technologies. And then the level of adoption was only 3%, which was proved by the report of GSA in 2023, that only 90 or 97% of the population are still using clean cooking technologies. Now, the lesson learned from this project was the fact that they should promote local technologies instead of importing external technologies to the local population. But also, those technologies were to be adapted to the income level of the beneficiaries, since it was a barrier for them to purchase those technologies. And other lesson was also to support local producers to maximize the local market before expanding and going outside the local market, which was still having a bit of problem of adopting new technologies in terms of access to energy in the displaced population. So another lesson learned from this project was also to start by providing a sensitization to face the barrier of cultural background. this was especially something that was to be done to help people to understand why they should move from using open fire with freestone to improve cooking technologies. Because using improved cook stove was to help them to reduce access or exposure to the emission from firewood, but also protect the environment from deforestation. But this is a purely something that should be work starting from an awareness, a community awareness, to work on the cultural background to facilitate the adoption of new cook stoves and also fuel in the community as per the project. And this is something which was not done. So if there were another project to be run, then I think this is something that should start so that it can go like a piloting project where people understand first the technologies and then I'll later go to the deep implementation.
And whilst they're coming up, just to try and like gauge the kind of audience that we have, let's broaden and think about either energy failures or humanitarian failures. So has anyone ever seen an energy project or a humanitarian failure? Introduce our 5 panelists. So when I read out your names, maybe you could give a quick wave. But Mr. Shandipan is a senior director with Doctors for You, who are a pan-Indian humanitarian organisation that provide medical care to vulnerable communities. He's currently managing multiple CSR projects at a national level, including health infrastructure construction, renovation and upgrading. Jamal has over 25 years of extensive experience in power quality, energy management and mergers and acquisitions. He currently is the Asia Pacific Regional Director for Access to Energy Program at Schneider Electric. His expertise encompasses product engineering, system design and project execution, with a focus on developing IoT-based solutions for remote energy management and system protection. Amy is the Partnerships and Strategy Lead for the Global Platform for Action on Sustainable Energy and Displacement Settings, which is otherwise known as the GPA, at UNITAR, the global initiative supporting SDG 7, access to sustainable energy for all in forced displacement settings. Andrea serves as an energy specialist consultant in the World Bank, where he provides technical assistance, knowledge leadership, and operational support to deliver energy access in sub-Saharan Africa. He also supports the World Bank's ESMAP unit to disseminate innovative approaches to electrify households, businesses, and public institutions in hard-to-reach areas. Fazle is the founder and director of Enver Renewable Energy Services Limited, a rural energy enterprise with over 12 years of experience providing decentralized renewable energy solutions and services to underserved communities in the northeast region of India. Okay. Before I get any further, can I just check, what time are we aiming to finish? I know that we started a bit late. So on to the first question. So starting with Fazle. Please share how you have experienced energy access failures in your work and how they've affected your activities.
Thank you, and good afternoon to you all. I am Fazle Mustafa. I come from the northeastern part of India, which has 8 states, and these are all under the Indian Himalayan region. So when we say Himalayan region, with that disaster, we are prone to disasters. And specifically from the state where I come from, Assam, is the most vulnerable out of all the 12 Indian Himalayan states because of the perennial flood we get every year. These floods can happen, maybe we can get 1 wave, 2 wave or 3 wave. It goes up to 3 waves. As per the State Disaster Management Authority of Assam, last year, more than 10 lakh population got affected because of flood. Around 500,000 livestock life is lost or displaced, and some 1,000 hectares of land got washed away. And when we say lands getting washed away, it's not that flood has gone out and from tomorrow we can do cultivation there. Because if you know the river Brahmaputra, which is our main river and which is the main reason for the flood, actually carries a lot of sands along with it. And when sand comes into the paddy field or something, then what happens? That paddy field cannot be cultivated for at least 5 years. So that is the geophysical or socioeconomic conditions, the population gets affected every year. And the river Brahmaputra flows from the eastern part of Assam and goes up to the western part of Assam. And in this river, there are around 2,000 small riverine islands. When in Assamese we call it chor or saporis. These are very, very small islands where around more than 3 million population stays in those riverine islands, and they are not connected to the mainland. And when you say they are not connected to the mainland, that means they don't have the lifestyle what we have. They don't have energy access, they don't have proper healthcare, they don't have proper education. And we, as an entrepreneur, as a social entrepreneur, basically from the region, moved by these disasters which has been coming again and again, what we thought is actually help these people to come out from that socio-economic or physical stature. And what we thought maybe energy could be the first catalyst for their development. And what we looked at is to provide basic home lighting systems to them. And when we say flood and this population, these people keeps on migrating also because the river Brahmaputra keeps on changing its courses. So an island today may get submerged under water tomorrow or maybe next year. Then they will get migrated to some other embankments, they will stay there, and then they may have to moving into some other place. And when they move from one place to the another, what happens? They actually lose their original lands and they become more like the migratory population what we have in Pan India. They will not have any original documents of anything, and they will not have their own land. They will be staying in a small thatched houses, and that's how they live in. And when we tried bringing in the first hope of energy to them by providing home lighting systems, they were not in a position to buy in with direct cash. And we started looking at bringing in financial linkages to them. Then because these people were so at the below of the pyramid, they don't have any of their documents or anything. The bank actually said no to finance them, or the financial institutions said no to finance them or for their any solutions, be it a home lighting solutions or an income generating solutions. And their reason is you give us collateral, then only we will finance you. अरे जिसका पास जमीन ही नहीं है वो कहाँ से collateral देगा आपको? How will they give you collateral when they don't have their own land? That is the kind of scenario. These things doesn't get reflected to the national media here because I think flood in Assam never gets covered in national media. You will get glimpses only when it's at the peak. You don't get to see the real scenario what it's. But if you Google it, you will get lot of papers which writes about how flood has affected the state Assam. Then, because we were keen to support these migratory populations, what we thought, let us do something by our own. I mean, few of our entrepreneur friends, we pulled out some money, though we didn't have the expertise, and we thought we will self-finance them. We will not take any interest, but maybe we will take it from them in 6 months or 7 months. And then we invested, we made a small program which looked very perfect in paper. And when we actually implemented, it was the most imperfect case history we actually have. Because we didn't have the history of making financial linkages. We didn't have the expertise. So what has happened? I mean, everything looked good. We looked at how the recollection will happen, how it will happen, and then we implemented it. But we forgot the main crux of that particular geography is that these people are migratory. So maybe in some places the systems they left behind because flood came in and they moved away. Okay, but still being an person from the community itself, we thought no, we should actually do something. So this is where I'm talking about the individual failure. I mean, we made we invested. When we say we are grassroots level entrepreneurs, we started our business with only maybe investing around 1 lakh rupees. And we brought a pool of around 15-20 lakhs to do such work, but we lost the whole money. And what has actually done that to us? It slowed our growth. It slowed our growth. I mean, we couldn't reach out to more people to whom we thought we should have actually done. Then, again to help them, we jumped into the national wagon of 100% electrification, where there were schemes you go ahead and do electrification in the most remotest corner and power up the unelectrified households. And we went ahead and we powered those households. Yeah, I'll shorten it. Yeah, I'll shorten it. So we powered up again those households with the national schemes. Okay. So though that particular scheme was successful maybe in the mainland, I mean the main central part of the country, but it was not successful there again to a population who are affected by flood everywhere. If we give a battery bank which weighs around 100 kg, it will not be successful, because if they have to move, they will save themselves or they will carry the battery bank. The other things they can carry along with them. So, and then there were other cases also. I'll shorten it here, maybe manufacturing defects, everything added it to it, and ultimately we lost the trust of the people whom we wanted to work for. And still today, there are places where we are little bit, I mean, whenever we go to that site, we fear ourselves. I mean, if somebody will come and catch hold of us, you have given us a very defective piece, and because of which we lost a lot of money in repairing it and everything. So that is first the individual failure. To suppress our failure and create it as an excuse, we jumped it into a collective failure.
I come from a background where we are an implementer for most of the CSR programs. So one of the examples that I wanted to actually give for this energy failure is from our own work. So one quick background of what Dr. Sori does is that we act as more of an bridging gap between health system infrastructure that is getting built in across and CSR projects. So we help them develop the project, we help them get what equipment to be put, what is the structure, everything we advise them. The example I wanted to give is in the same line that during the COVID, when there's a massive crisis happening, that we have to set up oxygen plant across, we have to set diagnostic center equipment across. So we did on papers, and a lot of media thing is that we have set up 130 plus oxygen plants, and we got all the infrastructure ready in maybe 4 to 5 months. But that is a very beautiful story in one part. But another part is that when I look at from my perspective, especially when we were implementing these projects in a pretty rural area like Nagaland, Manipur, or even in very other state like Tamil Nadu, go interior, outer of Madrid district. So there, if I have to say, the big hurdle that we found is that we got in all the costly equipments, which is almost 1.5 CR to 200 dollars, which is more than $150,000 to $200,000 worth of equipment in, and that could capacitate almost 1,000 beds of oxygen. We got it all done. Infrastructure got ready in less than 3 weeks. All the lines and oxygen lines were all put in. The minister came and did a fancy inauguration, got all media credits. But when our engineer came and tried to switch on, we couldn't switch on. Big problem was that even we didn't know that the energy requirement for that site was not that much. It was in rural area. Basically, the load is very, very, very low, and it needed additional transformer, it additional line. It took us almost 6 to 8 months to get that plant activated. By the time the code was over. And it took us almost a year of understanding what went wrong, how to improve it. Now we have started getting in that we don't take blank requests to government. when our government says that yes, we want this things, we tell them, okay, you want these things, then this is a checklist, please fill the checklist. Let us know whether you have the required electrical lines, whether you have the infrastructure to manage it, whether you have the manpower to manage, because that is another big problem. Many other places where we give city machines. It's a very fancy machine that will help diagnose, but unfortunately, they were not having enough manpower to run it. So there was another big crisis that was happening. So now these all we have put it into a big checklist and we gave to the government that if you want a donation from us and you want us to get it from a corporate and get you the thing, we'll get you all the things. We'll set up, we'll do training, but you have to be ready to take it up. Without that, the donation does not make sense. It is not a political donation that we are going to do for media or anything. It has to be a real donation. So that is a checklist system and started. More than that, the next logical thing that we also started as a practice is also that we started having a pre-launch meeting with a government official, because many of the time the bureaucrats, it is not that bureaucrat doesn't want to do it. Many times they are not educated enough to know that what is needed, what is not to be, what is needed. So we also have started educating them, helping them understand the system, helping them understand the requirement. We started having a list of training that is needed, pre-ordering, pre-training, then post-training. We also nowadays started keeping a contingency fund. We know that many times government funds might come very, very late. It can take 6 months, it can take a year. But since we are the PPAs who are being responsible to the community, so we started keeping a special fund, separated contingency fund. In case if there is any point of failure, we can get in and put our fruits in and build the structure up. So these are like a couple of checklists we started building it, and I will not say we are still 100% perfect, but at least we are able to correct many of the things. At least most of the plans that we had given in COVID in 2020 and 2022, it has took us almost a year. But I think by 2023 and 24 is what everything is got operational, to be very frank. But nowadays we started reducing the time little bit more, and with more and more exposure, I think we will also be able to get into these things. But yes, energy infrastructure and health sector is a very, very, very crucial area, because the health is the main aspect that is going to connect with the requirements of the ground.
For that, I'll try and stick to the time limit there. So, after post-lunch session is always difficult. I hope all of you are still here and with us. So, I'll try to keep it short. Like we saw the art installation looking at through different lenses, I think I'll just put on the failure lens. I'll not talk about anything else other than what failures we have seen and probably how we tried to manage it. Typically, in any type of intervention, whether it's humanitarian or otherwise, there is a funding program design phase, and then you go into, I would say, actual design of the solution, implementation, and then post that you have to go into maintenance to make sure that the system continues to deliver value over its lifetime. Okay, so I'll stick only to the design, implement, and service piece. Okay, the funding and stuff we heard some in the morning. I'm sure there'll be other sessions on that as well. So I think in the case of design, I would like to point out a site with Amy and Rami have visited me several times there in Bangladesh. I would definitely like to call it a failure in the sense that it is a failure of how the funds were utilized. Okay, because here I'm specifically pointing out over-design. Okay, it is a very, very important responsibility of all of us in our own ways to make sure that the funds that have been allocated are used and utilized very efficiently. It means you can do more with the same amount of funds. We call it bang for the buck. So this is what we're trying to improve. Now, in the site that we have seen, the solar panels, and Amy knows exactly what I'm talking about, are installed on a structure in a very, very, I go to the extent of saying the government doesn't allow permanent buildings in that situation. So while the buildings around are like this, you should see the structure on which the panels are mounted. I guarantee you, even if there's a massive cyclone and many things simultaneously, everything else will go, but the structure will still be standing. That is not what is needed. It is a supremely over-designed thing, and I'm sure it costs a lot of money. Okay, so this is one of the things. So where did this go wrong? I think many times we tend to work in silos. There are expectations that we know the best. You come, I can tell you from Schneider, if I go to somebody, they will say, no, this is needed, that is needed. They go purely from an engineering perspective and trying to say they want to mitigate all challenges and deliver the best solution. Sometimes that's an overkill. Not sometimes, most of the time it's an overkill. You have to be on the ground, and who's on the ground? Not us, but somebody else who's closer to the project, closer to the human intervention. Those organizations and the people who are designing have to be far more well connected. There must be a transparent flow of information. There must be trust between the two. I think this does not exist today, and this leads to failure. It leads to us indirectly burning the money, which we all know is so important. It's really the source of making everything happen. Okay, so this is one part of it. So this is on the design. I think more collaboration, more transparency, more trust. And literally the engineering egos have to be put aside, and we need to really design for the purpose, for the installation, for the people, keeping in mind cost effectiveness and, of course, quality. Now you can do this the other way around and start cutting costs and saying, I want the cheapest solution in the market. I'm sure you'll find it, but you can be sure that soon enough you will be spending in many other different ways on service calls and things like that. And in the humanitarian sector, and even in the sector that Fazle was talking about, just accessing the site may amount to 5 to 10% of the project cost per visit, if you want to go there with spares and things like that. Okay? So this is something we really have to keep in mind. So this is it. Next is around installations. And here I would like to go back. We work on with Fazle on several projects. Site assessment is a very important point. Okay, again, this is a massive area for failure. I see Sudipta also sitting in the crowd. Yeah, I know he's suffering from the same problem. So, site installation, many times the BOM is created in Bangalore, in Mumbai, in Delhi, somewhere in a nice little office. You don't know what is happening at the site. Okay, even the brands that are specified, you will say brand A, B, C, D. Maybe A, B, C, D is not available in that part of the country. Maybe there is a XY, something which is far more popular, far more practical to use. So I'm not saying you should start becoming flexible on all these things, but there should be an awareness of this. Again, it means partnerships, it means collaboration. Okay, so but this time it could be two different people, the implementer at the site and the designer. So you see, across this value stream, there are different people with different functions, and they have to be transparent and, I would say, daring enough to collaborate. Okay, because they know each other, but still, why are we running into this trouble? So this is one part. And finally, I would come to also another part on the post-installation commissioning is two things. One is the obvious one, which is servicing. And the next is to try and understand how effective was the deployment eventually. Because many times I can tell you, we are working on several pilots and things like that. We do a lot of stuff when you're doing pilots because you install monitoring systems, you install this. The intention is to find out, is this rating okay? Is this power enough? Is the solar pumping enough? Is the battery enough? You do all of these things just to check this. But this has to be done on an ongoing basis. Honestly, if you're asking me, the technology is least of the challenges here because there are many technologies available with varying costs and varying abilities and capabilities. So technology is no longer really the biggest roadblock. It's a challenge somewhere for sure, but it's not everything. So we really need to understand how the effectiveness of this is. So again, use monitoring systems, use the right tools that are available to make sure that tomorrow when you have to repeat this, if you're doing something at a school, if you're doing something at a healthcare center or in some humanitarian crisis situation, you should have a sort of a feel whether that power, that rating of that configuration and the architecture, will it deliver what you want it to? Okay, they are combined within the community. I'm sure there are hundreds and thousands of installations that have been done. You can imagine the amount of data that's available that should also make it possible for us to be almost foolproof or failure proof, right? So, but where is this data and why are we continuing to fail? So I think this is something which we should definitely take away, right? So this is it. And the final part on the post commissioning is the service piece. This is an area which is supremely infamous, I would say. A lot of failures in this place. It is a hard topic. I'm not saying it's easy and we are all sleeping. It is a hard topic, but they are, and that is where short-term relief with long-term investments. That's what the topic of the panel discussion was. I think that part is something. This is a long-term thing. There are many parts of the world, I'm sure all of us in the room will agree, they are like solar graveyards. I'm specifically talking about solar here. Okay, there are installations, lots of good philanthropic money, called CSR money, government money, blended finance, whatever it is, has powered all of these things, but it's all turned into one large junkyard of solar components, batteries, all of these things. So how do you avoid this? How do you make the long-term investments on training, making sure the people are there, they respond, and even finance mechanisms so that things like batteries, they are literally consumables in this type of a solution, right? How do you make sure this is replaced eventually? What is your funding mechanism to do this? Honestly, the program design sometimes doesn't go as far as that. If it's philanthropic, if it's grant-based, you go in one direction. Of course, everybody intends to do the whole thing, but many times it doesn't go through. So this is another critical area where failures, I'm sure, if I pass the mic around, most of you will already have stories in this area where it has completely failed. Okay, so these would be my thing, I would say failures. We have done a lot of things at Schneider. Of course, I'm not going to turn this into a pitch, but fair enough, we have observed these problems. We are trying our best to sort of mitigate wherever we can. But these are the failures I would like to share. And if anybody wants to know how we are trying to answer it, maybe that's the next question. So I'm not good at it. Thanks.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'd like to follow on the point on coordination. My name is Andrea. I work with the World Bank, ESMA, which is a multi-donor trust fund where we provide technical assistance to World Bank lending operations. Now, let me back up a second. By 2030, we have to electrify about 1 billion people, the vast majority of which will be living in FCB area. FCB stands for fragile, conflict, and violent areas. Now, a part of this, about 40%, are best served through open solar solution. The problem is that that requires about $20 billion in capital, and it's a huge amount of money, and this is only for a portion of it. And you also have to know that an off-grid solar system that is deployed in FCB areas is about 70% more expensive than somewhere else. Now the point is, does this amount of money exist, and does it exist in terms of public funding? The answer is simple, it doesn't, right? So the point is, when we want to achieve access, we have to think of how public sector money is spent so that it leverages private sector investment, right? Because it can't be public sector alone. And this brings me to my main point and figure, which is how many of us will actually think that displacement settings, humanitarian context, are viable for an off-grid solar energy market. Let's just try with a raise of hand. How many of us think that displacement settings, refugee camps, are a place where there is a market for off-grid solar solutions? Who thinks so? Okay. Okay, good. So
Sorry, by market do you mean some form of a profit?
Yes. Yes, payments, right? That is not entirely given away. So it is okay. So if, let's say, if the sector thought as you, we wouldn't be here, right? Because we wouldn't be talking about their story. But in fact, this is an issue, and often it's an issue where people who are involved in the sector do not fully acknowledge that there is a private sector that needs to be unlocked. Now, in my view, we have three main actors that are involved. We have humanitarian actors. There are UN, NGOs, and so on that are more focused on addressing the crisis, which is the short-term part of today's conference. There are long-term actors that are focused on the development side, such as multilateral development banks. You have governments who, when we're talking about refugee areas, are kind of on the fence, right? Because it's not always within the government's target to electrify those areas. And then, of course, you have the private sector that needs to be involved. Now, the coordination among these three actors, I think it's the real problem. So we have to think of what are the biggest challenges that we have in actually unlocking this market. In my view, there are four challenges. I'll be brief, but after your intervention, I also have to be technical, right? We want to really talk about some meaty stuff. The first thing that I see is that there is a lot of reliance on giving systems for free, right? We're talking about small solar systems that are given to households. We're talking about solar lanterns, solar home systems. The fact that systems are given for free causes two issues. The first is that undercuts local companies, right? Because if there is even an informal market, local companies just can't compete, right? And the second is that these interventions tend to be one-off. Whereas the problem is that you want to provide an electricity service, not just the system, right? The second point is that many of these systems tend to be low quality, so not quality assurance verified. When you distribute a system that doesn't work after a short amount of time, you undermine the entire system. And evidence from South Sudan shows that actually households, after being given a solar system that not works, after a while, they go back to utilizing diesel, which is much more expensive and polluting. So you can imagine how we're actually harming the sector. The third point is that we tend to give subsidies, right, in these areas to bridge the affordability gap, which is huge. And that's a good thing, but when the subsidies are not very targeted, then it becomes harmful. Because either, for example, we target refugees and not the host community, and that creates tension and conflict. Or you give blanket subsidies, so subsidies go to people who are actually wealthy and do not need them. That is also a perverse incentive, right? And the last thing is that we see a lot in bank work is that there is a tendency on reliance on public procurement, in the sense that governments want to be those purchasing those systems and be the one distributing them, either for free or at a cost. That has the same challenges of giving systems for free, because you really undermine the whole competition, right? The whole benefit of having a private sector. You cause delays, there are dangers of corruption, and to me, the main point that follows from this is that you are still not providing a service. When you're going to these areas and you just give a one-off intervention, what happens after a system fails? And think about a school or a health center. You're given a system, and what we've seen, and there are many people in this room who could talk about this, is that these perverse incentives causes governments and other stakeholders to install more systems on the same roof of the same school or the same center, none of which work. So we have to get out of this means. If this is not a failure, I don't know what is, right? So I promised that I was going to be bleak in this part. We're talking about how to solve it in the next question. But to me, these are really the main challenges that prevent us from creating a viable market in these areas. And after we'll talk about how to solve it. Thank you.
Responsibility was to provide the essential services within the camps, which host over 1 million Rohingya refugees. It's basically in a village in the forest, actually, far away from some urban centers, and there's not really a big economy around because the refugees don't have the right to work and don't have the right to move. So basically, there's high reliance on humanitarian aid. During the emergency response, the whole kind of UN and INGO system really set up these camps. And I think it was, in the short term, we would say it's a success. People got their essential services met, including shelter, water, food, and energy. And then specifically zooming in on the energy parts, there was kind of the individual electricity needs at the household level. So really looking at immediate solar lantern, basically free distribution of solar lanterns. On the more community level, there was electricity needs for water, wash services, and public lighting. So all of that was done in cooperation with development banks and NGO partners. So in the short term, you would say success, great, very large settlements set up very quickly in emergency and hard circumstances, electricity provided. I got there a few years after the initial response and basically found what would be the failure. So that around, I think, 50% of the streetlights, around 6,000 streetlights were not working. On the household level, a lot of households would bring us their solar lantern and say, hey, can you repair this? Can you support me? These lights don't work anymore, they're 2 years old. I need light in my home. And also on the water pumping side, a lot of the solar water pumps were not working, so a lot of the wash services were diminished. So that was interesting to see short-term good success, longer-term big maintenance issues. So where we came in, and we had a project with Jamal that he briefly mentioned, we wanted to set up basically a training center and a small repair service center where we would train part of the community members. Around 50 refugees were trained on how to maintain solar streetlights, solar lanterns, and solar mini-grids. And it was very interesting. It took 3 years to set up the project. It was kind of a multi-stakeholder project with the UN, Schneider Electric, Electricians Without Borders, and a local NGO. And so we all, in theory, had it set up. In practice, it took, I think, 2 years to get the permissions to build the training center. It was, I think, very piecemeal funding. So we got a little bit of money from the UN to build the training center, a little bit of money from Schneider to actually equip it and deliver the training, and then some innovation funding to basically employ the refugee volunteers to then be responsible for the maintenance. And I was responsible for kind of developing that, so I guess if I take responsibility for the failure there, it's really about trialing something that's hard and trying to fix quite a systemic issue. And I think we did have some successes there, but in the longer term, we weren't able to sustain that funding. So I think probably from the community perspective, it was like, oh yeah, great, I had a job for a year, but then what? So I think that's something, and goes back to the point Andrea just made around collaboration, is how to kind of look from the short term and then say, how do we build in longer term systemic solutions that really build the local economy so people locally can be responsible for maintenance and make sure those energy systems work in the long term. And then the extra spare parts and tools and things are and other system components are there to really make sure that works in the long term. So a lot of learnings and very complicated context. But even though it's hard, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't learn from those failures and integrate them in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. So on to our second question, which is, how can we learn from or address failure? And you can choose to answer this at an organisational level or kind of more at a systems level. We are running a little bit late, so I'm going to ask you to maybe just stick to one key point, and if you could kind of stick your hand up at 1.5 minutes this time. Yeah, let's go this way.
I'll be super short. I think we need much more dialogue. At least when I was working in Cox's Art, the pressure of the working environment was so high. There's so many needs and there's so little energy experts. But it was beautiful to have a collaboration with the private sector and with other partners to solve these issues. So I think much more dialogue amongst different types of stakeholders is really needed to then be able to learn from failure and actually leverage the strengths of all the different kind of partners to take those responsibilities where they're needed. So There's a lot of egos, I think, that need to be dropped, and we don't need to be so scared of not getting funding in the future or something. Because if we're able to drop those egos and speak to each other openly and transparently, we can learn together much, much faster. And in the end, it's public money, and so this should be used effectively and should be all of our responsibilities.
I used a few seconds of Amy's time because she's been so quick. So to continue, and thank you for mentioning the coordination, which is really the main point of us working in this sector. I think that the main statement that I'd like to make is that electrification is a public goal, right? It's a government goal. It's a government that has for its own population. However, it's something that in some contexts is better achieved through the private sector. But this doesn't mean that we have to leave the private sector alone, right? Especially when we are reaching really for the hardest to reach, the most vulnerable and fragile. No electrification in any country in the history has been achieved only with private sector. Like think about the US, right? There was a huge public sector effort, but somehow we're expecting that to happen in the most remote and in the poorest countries. This is not possible. So we have to be smart on how we support the private sector in achieving this goal. To me, it's a matter of 5 things. Support on the supply side, right? We're talking about result-based financing, equity, concessional loan, de-risking. Support on the demand side, trying to build that affordability gap. But then third, think outside of the box, try to innovate. Think of what are the business models that can work that go beyond ownership. Think about energy as a service, think about rental models. Explore and not be afraid to fail. Fourth, talk to governments and make sure that they are involved in the conversation. Because now we're having all these access goals. But if suddenly governments realize that they have to electrify also their refugees, they start to say, okay, wait, now I have more people that I have to electrify, that becomes a little challenging. But if we build a consensus, and that is widely accepted, as for example is in Uganda, we have examples that we can follow, and this is the goal that we have to have. And the last one is that it all relies on local capacity. Amy said that, Jamal also said that, local capacity is key, and we have to believe in the strength, resilience, and resourcefulness of people who are in humanitarian settings of solving their issues because their capacities are limited. Thank you.
I'll just pick up on the point that he said, and that's probably very specifically the area that we are also focusing quite heavily on, is to build local capacities. So we do have several training programs and things like that which are running, but honestly, I don't think it's possible for any one entity, whoever that entity is, to solve the problem individually. So here we need a lot of collaboration. Incidentally, we are working with Celco itself in many different ways. But I think what is really critical is to be able to generate this local level of awareness. The solar system is not rocket science. I again go back to solar because we are sort of specifically around the topic. So the solar system is not really very hard to maintain. The training is not very complex. The site assessments need not be so difficult to do. The point is there just needs to be enough training around it. And really, how do you sort of deploy this? So this is the long-term investment that is really needed. Because without this, you can be sure that, you can go and install something. I can tell you, Fazle is looking at me, I'm sure he's having this trouble already. He may take 2 days to reach a site, install it and come back, and then when he comes back, there's a problem. And when he sends somebody all the way back, maybe somebody's just not turned something on, or one switch is not being selected or something like that. All this has to do with awareness. It has to do with this. So this is the long-term solution. Eventually, I think that will work. And in the humanitarian construct, I think the example that Amy was giving on the training refugee camp, that's something that we're extremely proud of, because it's very, very hard to set these up in such circumstances and in such locations. But honestly, she didn't mention, but she was also behind a very innovative program called the Energy Ambassadors. She's part of it. We just wrote along. But I think they have trained several of them now, and these energy ambassadors are actually fixing portable mobile apps and working on several other things. Even systems which have been installed, eventually they will be trained to sort of maintain them as well. So even in a situation like that, it provides hope. It gives the people who are being trained some possible livelihoods, if at all, even if they are rehabilitated or whatever it is. Right? So I think this is the main thing. Lots of other ideas as well, but I think the design collaboration at the design stage, the engineers, the installers, the service technicians, all that collaboration across the board is really the way out of this. It's easier said than done, but I think we all see this, but we all seem to be tripping over how to take the next steps. So I think I'd like to stop there.
I'd like to emphasize on three major points that we look for when we are looking at a solution perspective. One is coordination. You should have a better coordination with your stakeholder. You should have a better coordination with the government. You should have a very clear thing who is doing what and how it can be implemented. Without a proper coordination, any program is very difficult to implement. Next one is transparency. As an NGO, even we struggle to tell the world that where we fail. Maybe telling that could cut our fundings, could probably impact our work that is happening. But that is the most important key. That if you don't tell your failures, you will not get solutions out of it. Because it might be that you are not able to find a solution. Maybe we have a solution, and you can always communicate and you can work it out. So it is always very important that you have to be transparent with your system, because as we are working very close with government, that is the most common thing that happens. They build a very big structure with so many beds and things, but unfortunately it's just a ghost building that doesn't work. So we have to be very clear with what we are doing. Lastly, the most important thing that we have realized that any infrastructure that we build, it is very, very important that we involve the local beneficiaries. Let it be Gram Panchayat, let it be the ASHA workers, let it be the grassroots workers, or even the hospitals, a doctor. That makes a very big difference, because many of the decisions that comes to us, like that's a random village in ARB in Andhra state, you go and build a big facility with this dialysis center and that. But they don't even ask the hospital whether they really want it. If they want it, they have a solution. Because many of the time we come out with very fancy, big charts and big drawings that we have done in our office. But many of these things might have a local solution, local way of seeing the things. And that might be much more better than what we are bringing in. So incorporating the local and our knowledge is the best way that we can reduce the failure. These are the 3 points from my side. Thank you.
I will echo almost everyone's what you have pointed out. I have nothing much more to say. But when a program is designed or a system is designed, it's very, very essential to bring in the local flavor to it. Something what you are designing it here may not be successful in some other part of the country or of the world. Because if I have to refer to the zone I am working in, the Himalayan region, it comes with varied climatic conditions. So the design has to suit to it. Something which is suitable here in Karnataka may not suit in there. But if you bring in the same design there, it will not work out. And that's exactly is the reason why a lot of national programs implemented by the government has actually not very successful in the northeastern region of India, because we fail to bring in the local flavor. And when I say local flavor, the climatic condition, what exactly the beneficiary needs, and as he has rightly pointed out, what is the power requirement or a power need of a particular center, and accordingly it needs to be designed. And secondly, and most importantly, we are keen to look till the implementation part, and after that we do the financial audit. We never go into doing the performance audit. And if we are strict on doing the performance audit, being we from the enterprise perspective, we will also be more stringent into our deliverables, because post implementation we actually move into another program and this takes a sidetrack, and that's exactly is the reason why a lot of programs gets overshadowed in the long run. And thirdly, from the enterprise perspective, we should be aware of what are our deliverables. Don't overcommit just to get the revenue out of it. Deliver what you can meet only. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, I think we're over to the Q&A. So I just ask you to keep your questions brief, and if your question is targeted at a particular panelist, then please discuss.
One question I had is, do these failures occur because, for want of another term, because of a hand-down approach? We are an organization, for example, that wants to offer this service somewhere, and so we choose a target community, and we implement what we think is beneficial to that community. Do you think that's one of the bases of that service not working out in that situation? That is number one. And number two is, in all of the projects that you have described, was there a survey done prior to implementation of the project in collaboration with the actual people that exist in that community? So those are the two questions, open to anyone.
Okay, it works. So the first question about handout approach, I think yes, often. I mean, it's really depends on the type of situation. So in like a typical kind of refugee or emergency response, it's really the procurement systems are to buy, like procure, install, deliver, and then that's it. So there's not really connection with the supplier very much. And then the supplier doesn't have like a local shop or something to provide services. And often there's not a revenue stream, so a payment mechanism, because it's an emergency response. In the short term, if it's right after a disaster, usually not, you can't expect people to pay if they're really coming with nothing. But in the longer term, there's usually economy there. And that's where those market assessments aren't done. And that assumption of like, yes, people need this type of light, there we will supply it. So I think that also is Andrea's point around, handouts that then don't allow markets to build. And then concretely on the second question, in the project I mentioned where we kind of provided and developed a training center within the refugee camp, we knew the infrastructure around, so we knew there are mini grids, solar street lights, solar lanterns within the home. But what we didn't know was the capacity and skills already existing within the community. So basically we came and said, okay, we see all these streetlights, half of them aren't working. Do you have skills on how to repair these? And about the solar home systems that you bought from the local market because you didn't actually have support. What kind of skills do you have and need around that? So we really built the training curriculum to respond to the existing capacity within the community. And we found very interesting things by talking to people as well. They were like, oh yeah, we just need to know how to size the solar home system and how to build safety measures into it. So we were able to really tailor it to what we needed.
So thank you for that wonderful presentation. I think one of it is awareness creation, capacity building, and strategic partnerships, which is collaboration. In this conversation, and considering that we are engaging the community, but where is the user coming in? And when I say user, I mean, what are you doing in matters handing over to the client? You said a very important point, Sam, where it's just a small thing. Maybe the changeover switch was not put on at the right time or something like that. So how are you also ensuring that that bit is taken care of?
Well, to answer your question, what we've been doing, you must be aware of Seco Foundation's Energy for Health program, where they are looking at powering 26,000 health centers across India in 13 states. So, we being from the implementation part, we are part of that particular program. So what we are looking in, I mean, we are looking at multiple steps. Just immediately post installation, the center in charge is asked to identify one staff from the center who can be cross-trained on the functionality of the system. We know, as he has rightly mentioned, and even Jamal has also mentioned, saying that the staff gets transferred. So that is the first stopgap approach, right? Because it's a government job, they may get transferred to some other place. But immediately post installation, someone to know the functionality of the system. If there is a small tripping or something, how they can switch it on, right? That is the first step where we sit with the particular person and we cross-train them on the functionality of the system for maybe an hour or so. Post that, Sago Foundation has a separate program where they bring in different stuff from the health centers and capacity build them to look at small volunteer where they can themselves look at, and they become the point of contact with our technical people. So they will get a customer care number. They can call and they can then tell, I have seen the system, this is what are the parameters, it is showing that it is not working properly. So some can be addressed over the phone, and if it is not addressed over the phone, then our service team is equipped enough to understand what exactly is the problem and how that can be rectified. That way the turnaround time can also be reduced to a great extent. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, your question was pertinent to electrification of schools and health centers, this type of users, right? Yeah. So to me, in addition to what's been said, it is absolutely correct. There are two key elements that make it work. The first one is that you have an adequate remote monitoring system that lets you actually verify what happens without needing to go there. And it can be a remote monitoring, but it can also be a remote management system in the sense that there are many issues within the solar systems that can be resolved remotely without actually needing to go there, right? So that first solves one of the issues. And the second is that we really want to shift away from a mentality where we are having giving a system to somebody and not caring about whether it's maintained or not. So shifting away from installation and focusing on the performance. So making sure that we embed in contracts performance incentives, whether it be performance payment against determined KPIs, more generally just shifting away from donors funding almost all the capex of the system and then losing any incentive to long-term performance, because electricity is a service that's beneficial only if it lasts a long time. If it lasts a short time, then we're wasting money. Thank you.
Actually, a few points, but you've mentioned or you answered majority of them. The one thing that I wasn't too sure of was you find a community, maybe a company or several companies have put up solar solutions. Then, as the government, we get some funding, we put up rural electrification in the hope of reaching a goal of 100% electrification by 2030. Now the thing is, the community now has grid tied electricity, but they still have the solar solutions. Eventually, we will throw them away, and we have an issue of e-waste. So how is that handled?
You want to take this? I'll try and answer that. Okay, so I think you're talking about a situation where the situation on the ground has improved so much that the community has actually moved onto the grid and then they are left with solutions which this thing. So I think this is where the question of, this is not going to happen overnight. Okay, so this is not a short-term, sudden, unexpected surprise. So this has to be baked in when the design is being made. This is where you need to understand the situation on the ground, and even this is where the government interaction or the local, regulatory or electricity supply companies will they'll be able to tell you what the plan is, right? And when you are making the design, you make a design for something which is future ready. Okay, so the same solutions you're talking about can be prescribed to be grid connectable. Okay, so that's what you put in today. If I know that maybe 1.5 years from now, the grid is going to come here, then I can design it differently, right? But that intelligence is important. Intelligence of what's happening and our own design intelligence. Both have to come together. And that's when this is easily possible. Like I said, the technology is really no longer the bottleneck. It's the actual understanding of what the reality is on the ground. And if that's possible, the answer I think is there. It might cost you a little more, but that's when the sensitivity of the matter and our ability to, sort of say, okay, this is an investment that's worth making. And that's when you go as far as that. If you're looking for the lowest cost solution, then you will not be doing these things. But if you're looking to answer the question over a period of time for long-term, benefits, you will get into these topics, you will design accordingly, and sure enough, you will be able to use the same solutions further down the line. And coming at the end of the day, there is going to be an end of life, no matter how well you design it, right? The battery needs to be disposed. This is where the program design again is going to be super important. We have to, and I think we did that in the case of the camp that Amy is talking about. This is where if you go to manufacturers or you don't care much about the end of life, you're just looking at the price. I can tell you from experience, there will be products out there, not only batteries but several other things, even panels and things like that, which could be low price, but end of life, how to manage, none of those things are sort of set up. But if you look at, now this should become part of the prescription or the tender document itself, right? To say that you need to, whoever you're buying from, brand A, B, C, whoever, all these have to specify what is the end of life process. How to dispose, what to do, this needs to be defined. The reason this is sort of overlooked many times is because all this costs money. So that's the reason, that's the simple answer why it's overlooked. But it leaves you with a terrible outcome on the ground. Right? So I think that's what I would say.
A small thing, which is, you're talking about a segment of population that absolutely had zero electricity, then it got the solar system, and then it got the grid. To me, first of all, it's a little hard for it to happen, but if it happens, it's actually, it means that this population has been electrified, and that is generally a good thing, right? But for a solar system per se, even when grid has arrived, it depends on many factors, right? As you said, it doesn't happen overnight, so it's part of the government planning. So you have to reflect whether this cost electrification strategy was pursued. If it was chosen to electrify a household that was going to be electrified by the grid, then it's a risk that you have already internalized, right? And the user has decided to pay for a system. If the user owns completely the system, then it has an energy generation system at zero cost, right? So it may prefer to use the system rather than with electricity digital wheels. You can use it as a backup in case the grid is unreliable. There are many users, but the point that you made is correct. There is still an end use of the system. On ESMA, my unit, we drafted an off-grid solar e-waste management toolkit where we identify strategies to manage e-waste risk, which is the biggest environmental risk from off-grid solar system. And the thing is simple. There are really three ways you can go. You can offer technical assistance to companies and help them develop an environmental plan or some sort of commitment plan. You can give them grants to make sure that this is viable, or you can impose them to adopt certain strategies. And we found out that the most supportive strategy is more effective. Meaning, I don't want to filter out small companies that are unable to comply with those requirements if I don't support them first. So, carrots work best than stick. That's what I'd say.
I have a case study on this as well from a project that we talked about that explains exactly how we did e-waste take back and disposal and recycling. In Bangladesh, we were lucky because there is an e-waste recycling facility that's managed by the private sector, but in other places there aren't those capabilities, right? Which is a whole other system to set up. Even in Europe, it's not well developed. So it's something, but I can send that to you as well, and it has more learnings and failures in there as well.
E-waste is a trigger word for that.
I am also staying very close to Sundarban, another chronic disaster-prone area. And what I have learned in the last 10, 11 years as a self-donor kind of person, I have seen there are certain failures which are system design failure. So the procurement system has some juice or business model, I would like to say, and the entire value chain is lubricated by that money. And then there are certain stock which are kept for this recurring flood, recurring cyclone to take this opportunity. And then we have thousands excuse that okay, maybe water gone inside or this, that, people are not trained enough and that's why it is not working. This is one. Second, if it is a market, humanitarian relief, and if we are saying it market, who is the buyer and who is the seller? Do buyer have their voice? And even if they are having, can they raise this voice to this seller? Third point, we are saying business model for whom? The way I have indicated, the business model for some, not in this room probably, hopefully, they are doing their business and they are flourishing enough their business, taking undue advantage of this kind of situation. I have seen recently Selco's health sector solarization project, and we talked about technicians are not available, this, that. A pretty good complex system is run by a nurse who is hardly know anything about electricity, how they are managing it. So if you plan to succeed, if you plan to avoid failure, we are competent enough to do that. Then there are systemic problems. Like in flood-prone area, why to put complicated system? I had several discussions to put some of our flexible solar panel-based lighting and other solution. SDRM said, no way, we are happy with the diesel. Because we are here not coming to promote a product, we are providing services. And their relief operation never short of services. So they understand diesel engine may not work, the cutter may not work, so they are having spare parts and they provide services for a certain period, come back. So there are systemic problems, we are trying to solve it through operational solutions, and there are operational solutions we are trying to provide a systemic solution to that. So that is the greater mismatch between systemic problem and operational problem versus operational solution and systemic solution. So I think enough intelligence, probably we are just going there for the sake of going there. I put one example. First time I recommended some very local solar company in Calcutta to donate fuel because we are the cyclist and runner group. We go to Sundarban every now and then. First time it failed miserably and all friends like physically kicking me out. You shut your mouth. We got it. Second time we put this the headlamp, mostly cyclists or runners use, and it becomes so common now in Sundarban. Even the fish seller, they put a lamp and it run with 2 AAA batteries. And this is so popular product. So this is actually the product for those kind of situations. So you have to match the need with the technology.
I'm going to finish off and wrap up. Just by saying a load of thank yous. So thank you to all of you for coming to our panel today. Thank you to our fantastic panelists. Thank you to Selco for organising this event. And thank you to Vincent and Therese for their video contributions. And yeah, and just lastly, if any of you are interested in our Humanitarian Energies Failures project or in this kind of energy failures group that we've set up, please do feel free to reach out. So here I have kind of a number of social media links that you can find us on. And then if I flip to the next, and then here I have email addresses for anyone. Cool.